You've heard the term window shopping before, right? The image that first comes to mind is when you're walking down the street along a row of storefronts, and each of those stores has a big window filled with the things that they are selling. The point of it is that you see these things in the window, and you're supposed to be moved or drawn into that particular store to hopefully buy something. Obviously, that concept is changing a bit in our society as storefronts gradually and often, unfortunately, close up. And much of the window shopping that we now do is online and is done through advertisements and emails and splashy banners on websites. But what might this idea of window shopping teach us about who we are as a church? So I am Pastor Stephen Zeller, and I serve here at St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Colcamp, Missouri. I also serve as the Dean of the Osage Conference of our Central State Synod of the ELCA. Earlier this year, we, like I'm sure all of you, were asked to take a brief hiatus from worshiping together in person inside the walls of our church building in an effort to stop the spread of this virus that's around us. It's something that nobody wanted to do, but it was something that we needed to do in the face of a global pandemic. It was in the many days that we were apart and away from our buildings that I had this image of people who were window shopping, but they were on a deserted street where all of the storefronts had closed up. I could picture us looking longingly through the glass of a building at what once was, wishing things could return to how they used to be. That also made me think about the windows that you may find in many church buildings, having these stained glass windows stand between us and the place where we really long to be. Like this window here at the front of our building that not only shows our German heritage, but bids our community a willkommen, a welcome. But during these months that we were apart, your welcome here would have been met with locked doors. But luckily, I have the keys. So let's go in real quick. Stained glass windows can be funny, can't they? They are so often used to adorn our worship space, but they also prevent people who are outside from being able to see inside. And unless the image in the window is intentionally facing outward, like the welcome window at the front of our building is, you really can't even see the detailed images that are in the windows from the outside. Both of those things make it difficult for people to window shop when it comes to seeing the church gathered. Not to mention that stained glass windows also make it difficult for people who are worshiping inside to be able to see the world that is outside beyond these walls. Windows of all kinds can be a barrier between things and a barrier between people. And when our churches were not meeting in person because of the pandemic, that barrier felt more real, didn't it? Many of our churches moved their worship life online, which is quite similar to how the old storefronts have had to adapt and allow for more online window shopping. Now, I understand that this analogy that I'm using, for all it's worth, makes it sound like our worship life, even our discipleship life, is consumeristic, that we go shopping for what excites and entices us and what draws us in, that we want whatever is behind that window to be as splashy as possible and attract attention. And sometimes we do treat our worship life like that. But instead, what I'm curious about here are two questions. What are we longing for? And what is it that is drawing us to God? When we have the opportunity, really the privilege, as we've found out, to gather for worship in our church buildings, possibly surrounded by these stained glass windows that tell so many stories of our faith and our ancestors and our history, when we are there, what does our soul sing out for? Or when we find ourselves apart from our worshiping community, away from a familiar worship space, using different means and senses to participate in worship, what does our soul long for? Sometimes there are things that we can't control, like a global pandemic. Sometimes we just have to find ways to work with or around barriers that are placed in front of us in order to be church. But sometimes we are the ones who erect the barriers between ourselves and the thing we long for, between ourselves and an experience with God. These are days that we get to know that we have to see things in new ways. These are days where the stories that have stood over us for probably our whole lives, like the stories we find in our stained glass windows, have to take on new meaning for us and deeper meaning for us. These are the days where God is calling us to see the church in new ways, to look at the stories of our faith, whether it's in stained glass windows or through Bible study or online worship, and reflect on how God is at work, feeding our souls, shining light through the windows, doing a new thing in our midst. I pray that you can see God clearly through all of your windows in this life. Peace be with you.